The man in row 32 was wearing a cheap brown wig that didn't quite fit, dark sunglasses indoors, a plain jacket that had clearly been picked from a discount store. He sat hunched over, trying to make himself smaller, trying to be invisible. And for 2 hours, it worked. 10,000 people at the Los Angeles Forum that night had no idea they were sitting near the king of rock and roll. But Bob Marley knew. From the stage, under the lights, singing to a sea of faces, Bob Marley looked into row 32 and recognized the eyes behind those sunglasses. And what happened next would become the most legendary moment two music icons ever shared. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. Los Angeles Forum, June 12, 1976. The line to get into Bob Marley's concert stretched around the block. People had been camping out since dawn, desperate for tickets, desperate to see the man whose music was changing the world. Inside, the energy was already building. The opening acts had warmed up the crowd. Now everyone was waiting for Bob. In row 32, seat 18, a man sat perfectly still. He'd bought his ticket from a scalper outside, paying triple the price just to avoid showing ID at the box office. He'd driven himself here in a rented car, alone, telling nobody where he was going. Because if anyone knew Elvis Presley was attending a Bob Marley concert, this intimate evening would become a circus. Elvis had been listening to Bob's music for months. Catch a Fire, Burnin', Natty Dread. There was something in Bob's voice that Elvis couldn't explain, a spiritual depth, a rawness, a connection to something bigger than fame or charts or image. Elvis had spent 20 years being Elvis Presley, and lately he'd been wondering if he'd forgotten how to just be a man who loved music. So tonight, he'd done something he hadn't done in years. He'd disguised himself and gone to a concert as a fan. Just another face in the crowd. Just another person hoping to feel something real. The lights went down, the crowd erupted, and Bob Marley walked onto that stage. Elvis felt something shift in his chest immediately. The way Bob moved. The way he held his guitar like it was an extension of his body. The way he looked out at the crowd, not with the calculated smile of a performer, but with genuine love. This was different from anything Elvis had seen in American music. Bob opened with Trenchtown Rock, and the Forum transformed. People weren't just listening. They were connected, unified, moving as one organism. Elvis found himself swaying, forgetting to stay hidden, forgetting to be small. The music was pulling something out of him he thought he'd lost. Song after song, Bob performed with an intensity that made Elvis's hands shake. This wasn't a show. This was a spiritual experience. This was what music was supposed to be before it got packaged and sold and analyzed and destroyed. Then Bob began playing One Love. The opening chords floated through the Forum, and 10,000 people began singing along immediately. One love, one heart. Let's get together and feel all right. Elvis sang too. Quietly at first, then louder. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of an audience, part of a collective experience. For 20 years, he'd been the one on stage, the one everyone watched. He'd forgotten what it felt like to watch someone else, to be moved by someone else's gift. Bob was in the middle of the second verse when it happened. He was scanning the crowd the way performers do, making eye contact, connecting with individual faces. His gaze moved across row 32, passed over Elvis, then stopped, came back. Bob's voice didn't falter, but his eyes locked onto the man in the cheap wig and dark glasses. For a moment, Bob just stared. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not a performer's smile. A smile of pure recognition, of disbelief, of joy. Bob kept singing, but he was walking now, moving to the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving row 32. The band noticed something was happening, but kept playing. The crowd sensed a shift in energy, but didn't understand why. Bob reached the end of the verse and made a decision. He signaled the band to keep playing softly. Then he spoke into the microphone. "Hold on," Bob said, his voice carrying through the forum. "Hold on just a moment." The crowd quieted, confused. Had something gone wrong? Was the concert stopping? Bob was pointing now, directly at row 32. "Brother," he said. "Brother in the brown wig and the sunglasses. Yeah, you, I see you." Elvis's heart stopped. 10,000 faces turned to look at row 32. Elvis sat frozen, trying to decide whether to run or stay. "You came here to hide," Bob continued, his voice gentle but clear. "You came here wearing that disguise because you wanted to just be a person who loves music. And I respect that. I honor that." Bob paused. "But I also can't pretend I don't know who you are." The crowd was murmuring now. Who was Bob talking to? Who was in row 32? Bob's smile widened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have royalty in the building tonight. The king himself decided to come hear some reggae music." Elvis's hands were shaking. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading. The moment his private experience would become public spectacle. "Elvis Presley," Bob said into the microphone. "Thank you for being here." The forum exploded. 10,000 people screaming, standing, craning their necks to see row 32, cameras flashing, people climbing over seats trying to get closer. Elvis slowly removed his sunglasses, then the wig, and there he was, the king of rock and roll, sitting in a cheap seat at a reggae concert, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. The crowd's screams grew louder. Security was already moving toward row 32, but Bob held up his hand, stopping them. "No," Bob said firmly. "He came here as a music lover, not as Elvis Presley. He came here to feel something, and I won't let him be crushed by the very thing he was running from." Bob looked directly at Elvis. "But I do have one request, brother, if you're willing." Elvis stood up slowly. His voice, that legendary voice, carried through the forum even without a microphone. "What's that?" "Come up here," Bob said. "Share this stage with me, not as the king, not as Elvis Presley, the icon, just as a man who loves music. Sing with me." Elvis hesitated. He'd performed for presidents, for millions, for crowds bigger than this. But walking onto Bob Marley's stage, as a guest, as an equal, this felt more terrifying than anything he'd ever done. The crowd was chanting now. "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" Elvis looked around at the faces surrounding him. They weren't screaming for Elvis Presley, the commodity. They were screaming for a moment that would never happen again. Two legends, one stage, no planning, no production, just music. Elvis started moving toward the stage. Security cleared a path. People reached out to touch him as he passed, but gently, reverently, like they understood this was sacred. When Elvis climbed onto that stage and stood next to Bob Marley, the forum went completely silent. It was as if 10,000 people collectively held their breath, afraid that speaking would shatter whatever magic was happening. Bob extended his hand. Elvis took it. They shook, then pulled each other into a brief, tight embrace. When they separated, both men had tears in their eyes. "What should we sing?" Bob asked quietly. Elvis laughed, a sound of pure nerves and joy. "I don't know your songs well enough to do them justice. Then let's do one of yours, Bob said. One that means something. Elvis thought for a moment. Then he said, Can't Help Falling in Love. Bob nodded. I know it. Bob turned to his band, gave them the key, the tempo. They'd never played this song before, but they were professionals, and this was history. They'd figure it out. Bob started strumming his guitar, finding the melody. The band joined in, giving the Elvis classic a reggae rhythm, offbeat, syncopated, transforming it into something new while keeping its soul intact. And then Elvis began to sing. Wise men say, only fools rush in. His voice filled the forum, that instrument that had moved millions. But tonight it was different. Stripped down, vulnerable, raw. Bob joined in on the second line, his voice blending with Elvis's. But I can't help falling in love with you. Two voices that should never have existed in the same space, creating harmony that made the impossible feel inevitable. The crowd swayed in stunned silence, afraid to make noise, afraid to interrupt. People were crying. Strangers were holding each other. This wasn't a concert anymore. This was church. Elvis and Bob sang through the entire song, their voices weaving, together, two completely different styles finding common ground in emotion, in honesty, in the simple truth of the lyrics. When they reached the final line, I can't help falling in love with you, they sang it together, holding the note, letting it ring through the forum until it faded into silence. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the applause started, not wild cheering, slow, rhythmic clapping. The sound of 10,000 people acknowledging they'd witnessed something that transcended entertainment and became art. Elvis turned to Bob. Thank you, he said simply. No, Bob replied. Thank you. You reminded me why we do this, why any of this matters. They embraced again, and this time the hug lasted longer. Two men who'd never met, who existed in completely different worlds, recognizing each other as brothers. Elvis walked off the stage to thunderous applause. He didn't return to his seat. He left through a side exit, climbed into his rental car, and drove into the Los Angeles night. Alone again, but different. Changed by 3 minutes and 20 seconds of shared music. Bob returned to his set, performing for another hour. But everyone in that forum knew they'd already experienced the highlight. Not just of the concert, of their lives. After the show, a journalist cornered Bob backstage. Elvis Presley was at your concert. You got him on stage. What was that like? Bob smiled. That wasn't Elvis Presley up there. That was a man who loves music, same as me, same as anyone in that audience. We just happened to sing a song together. That's all music ever needs to be. The next day, newspapers tried to capture what happened. Elvis crashes Bob Marley concert. Two kings share one stage. The night rock met reggae. But every headline fell short. Because what happened that night wasn't about genres or fame or crossover appeal. It was about two human beings finding a moment of connection in a world that constantly tried to keep them separated. It was about music doing what music does best, reminding us that beneath the costumes and the lights and the expectations, we're all just people hoping to feel something real. The people who were there that night never forgot it. They told their children, who told their children, about the night Elvis Presley wore a cheap wig to a Bob Marley concert and ended up singing on stage. About the night, two legends proved that music has no boundaries, no hierarchies, no walls that can't be broken down by a shared melody. If this story moved you, remember that the greatest moments in music aren't the ones that are planned and produced. They're the ones that happen when artists forget about being artists and remember what made them fall in love with music in the first place. when they take off their disguises, literal or metaphorical, and just share something true. Subscribe for more untold stories about the moments that changed music history.